women are together. If the woman emits seed first, then the child will be a female. If, however, if the woman emits seed first, then the child will be a male. So the Alter Rebbe told his grandson, if a man emits seed first, there'll be a female, that's your mother. If a woman emits seed first, she bears a male, that is you. So I believe what he was trying to emphasize was the incredible closeness that he had to his grandfather, because his mother was the seed of the male, and then his mother emitted seed first. So now he again, there's a stronger connection to the Alter Rebbe. Okay, today we start the fifth letter of Iggeret Hakodesh, holy letters. So it's on page 212, and we start letter number 5. The letter begins, again, it's going to be about the greatness of mitzvahs in general, tzedakah in particular, but it's going to take us into an excursion of speech. Very, very fascinating and interesting topics will be explained, or at least hinted to, in this chapter. So the Rebbe begins with a quote from a verse in the book of Shmuel, the book of Samuel. Over there, the story is, it talks about the exploits of David HaMelech, how powerful he was. I don't know. Okay. Says one person is waiting. Okay. That it talks about how David HaMelech was a very powerful warrior. And it says, and David HaMelech made a great name for himself. And the rabbis point out, it can mean that even though he was a great warrior, he treated the vanquished army with respect. And what he did was he actually buried them. So his reputation spread not only as a great warrior, but as a, so to speak, a mensch, that even after he gets rid of his enemies, he treats the bodies respectfully. Or alternatively, it means that he made a name for himself just in terms of his power, just in terms of his accomplishments. People were scared of David and of the young kingdom of Judea. But the Zohar has an insight. It says, Vayas David Shem, David made a name. Not he made the name for himself, but he made a name for God. To which we're going to read in a minute that Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai was very profoundly moved by that David HaMelech created the name of God. And he said, how do we do that? How can we create the name of God? And that is by giving charity to the poor. So we make the name of God. So the Rebbe's letter that we're going to be studying will be discussing, what does that mean to make the name of God? How do you create the name of God? And of course, it will also be why, if there is such a concept, why is it through the mitzvah in particular of giving tzedakah to the poor? In order for us to understand this, he's going to explain to us the difference between, not the difference, but a difference between Chochmah and Bina. And he's going to point out that Chochmah and Bina are also found not only in terms of Sfirot, which means like illumination of godly energy. So it's not only an illumination of godly energy, but it's also in terms of worlds. worlds, worlds. So, for example, there's the world to come, Olam Haba. There's this world. In the world to come, we could talk about the idea of Gan Eden, a garden that's found in Eden. He's going to explain that the garden is the letter Hey, the Eden is the letter Yud. Now, if you just look at the difference between just in the way it's written, the letter Yud is a very small letter. It's essentially a dot. That's the letter Yud, a dot. Whereas the letter Hey is expanded, right? It has a bar on the top, horizontal, then it has a bar going down vertical, and then there's another vertical half bar. So it's much, much bigger than the Yud. We could say that the Yud, the relationship between the Yud and the Hey is looking at the dimension or the sign. We would say that the letter Yud, everything is very, very contracted or very condensed, very compact, maybe is a good word to use, whereas the letter Hey is expansion. Now, as a general concept, and we had this already in the beginning of the Tanya, chapter 3, when we talk about the difference between Chokhmah and Bina. Chokhmah is usually translated as wisdom, Bina is understanding, but in the later translations, maybe more modern translations, Chokhmah is usually conception or the beginning of thought, whereas Bina is amplification of thought, it's expansion of thought, using very practical, down-to-earth language. We have an idea, and then we think about the idea. We start with a seed, and then through cultivating the seed, something begins to grow. So the Chokhmah is the germ of the idea, the inception or conception of the idea, whereas Bina is taking this idea and expanding it, so now we could begin to understand it. The expression is, we will take this seminal thought, we will take this concentrated thought. So if you could imagine a dot, and we're going to extend the dot on both sides. So now we have a bar. We're going to take the thought and we're going to expand it horizontally, and we're going to expand it vertically. It's going to have a length and a breadth. What happens if we don't do this to the idea? What will happen is that the idea will simply dissipate. The mind is very fertile. Most of us would be considered quite intelligent. So we have many, many thoughts or many ideas. But because we don't grab the idea and almost run with it, stop. I had a thought. What was I thinking about? Why was I thinking about it? And then, yeah, right. I had a thought about X, Y, and Z. Then you actually have to concentrate and try to translate, almost more than translate, almost to transform something which is pure energy, pure thought, into something that can actually be grasped. Of course, when I say the word grasp, I don't mean it with fingertips, but in a figurative way. You have to be able to hold on to this idea and expand it. So that's the idea of Bina. The Rebbe is going to explain that there are many levels of Chokhmah. If there's a Chokhmah, if there's an idea or a thought which which can be brought downwards. It can be translated into Bina. That's actually a lower thought, a lower level of Chachma. There are actually higher levels, which the thought is so nebulous, the thought is so, I'll use the word, so spiritual. It is so in the beginning stages of creation that it can never be brought into Bina, to understanding. It's almost as if to say the external part of this thought can eventually be brought into Bina. And that is why, even, again, using very broad language, sometimes even after understanding a thought, there's still something beyond. It's like you understood this idea, you developed it, you're going to give a good lecture, or you're going to be able to perhaps draw it on a piece of paper, then an engineer will try to work with it and figure out, like, what do you really want? But even after you understand it, and especially even after you have das, actually you after you apply it, you might look at this and say to yourself, but it was more beautiful. It was deeper. There's something more to it than the Bina, than the understanding of it. Because the Bina, the understanding, will actually be able to deal with the part of Chachma, which can be brought down. In other words, which can be grasped. But there's a part of Chachma that remains elusive. And there are many words in Hasidus and Kabbalah that convey this, but even the concept of Gan Eden, right? A garden that's found in Eden. A garden is a place of pleasure, of beauty. The idea in its earliest stages, cannot be enjoyed because you don't understand it. It's just, literally flying through your mind. When can you begin to enjoy, to have a sense of accomplishment almost? That's when you begin to understand. So when we will then say and use as an image, that after you pass on, you go to a place called Gan Eden. You go to a place which is a garden of Eden. That would then mean you're being exposed to a world of delight. That's the garden, a world of enjoyment. What enjoyments are there in heaven? It certainly cannot be the physical enjoyments, which are very limited. An ice cream might look very good and taste very good, but after it's digested or after it's even melted, it doesn't have the same allure. So what enjoyment are we referring to when we talk about the neshama is in Gan Eden? Well, think to yourself. One of the most powerful of all enjoyments is the power to think and to understand, even more than to think. So I got it. That's a very satisfying feeling. And it's the best part of it is it has no calories. You could think and enjoy, and it could go essentially forever. So Gan Eden, the soul will have enjoyment of the enjoyment of understanding godliness. But where is this Gan? Where is this garden? It is found in Eden. It is found in Eden. Eden is the referring to the idea of Chachma, the idea which is still greater than the understanding. So again, Chachma leads to Bina, or Chachma, in order for Chachma to be effective, it has to go into Bina, but there are levels of Chachma which cannot descend into Bina. It remains above Bina. And that's the idea of Gan that's found in Eden. Other places, I think he said this in the first part of the Tanya, he calls it the idea of Nakuda Vehechala, that in the palace there always remains a Nakuda, there remains a dot, or a concentrated, so to speak, a concentrated energy. In the first part of the Tanya, he talks about, for example, in the holy temple, there was a courtyard where people stood and heard the songs of the temple. They could even maybe smell not only the sacrifices, but perhaps even the ketores. And then there was the inner courtyard where the priests were. In each one of these levels, the physical structure of the holy temple reflected a spiritual dimension. So if you were in the outer courtyard, there was a sense of closeness to God. But then when you walked up the steps and you went into the inner courtyard, there was a stronger, a more palatable type of an enjoyment. And of course, if you walked, which Israelite never did, but the priest who walked into the actual structure, not the courtyard, which did not have a roof, but walked into the temple building where the menorah was and the golden table and the golden altar was. So clearly there was a stronger sense of divinity, of the divine. And correspondingly to that level of divinity was the feelings of awe, reverence, and joy in the presence of Hashem. But even in that temple, the structure, there was another place where no one entered, except for the high priest once a year. We call that the Holy of Holies. That basically means that there was a Nakuda Behechala, that in the Hechel, in the palace of Hashem, there was a dot, there was a concentrated form of divine essence which could not be explained, could not be grasped. And that level, which was concentrated through the 10 Commandments engraved on stone, housed in a golden box and sheltered with 2 golden angels, that forever becomes the symbol of the Chokhmah, which is higher than the idea of being. The Rebbe will develop a very interesting, and tomorrow we'll start reading a little bit of this, a very interesting concept. You know, children, with very rare exceptions, there have been prodigies and geniuses that started to speak maybe at months, maybe 8 months and so on. But as a rule, children, it takes time for them to develop to speak. My wife is not here, so I can't ask her what's the average age. I think it's around between maybe 2, something like that. They begin to speak. Question: when do children begin to understand? And the answer is at a very early age. So children sitting by the breakfast table understand very well that this is cereal and this is milk and this is what they want, this is what they don't want, even though they cannot speak. which opens up a fascinating discussion. Where does speech come from? You can't say that the kid does not understand and therefore he cannot speak. He does understand. And sometimes we're impressed about how much they understand, and yet they cannot speak. So there's this idea of where does language come from? If we go even deeper, we'll notice something very interesting. I mean, I am talking. You could do this at home. If you say ah, you have to move your lips, open up your mouth, probably your tongue, ah. But if you say oh, the muscles are contracted in a different way. You say e. In other words, the very sounds of the guttural sounds or the sounds of language needs different parts of your mouth. So some sounds you can't say it with your teeth closed. Try it, close your teeth and try to say certain sounds. You can't. You'll have to open up the teeth. Try to say certain sounds with your lips closed. So there's actually, the sages tell us, there's actually 5 parts necessary to have the Hebrew language. You're going to need your lips for some. You're going to need your teeth, your tongue, the larynx, and the palate. So here's the question. Who teaches the person how to move the lips, how to move the tongue? We're going to teach him language. We're going to practice vocabulary. We're going to read on the couch, see, Yaakov, build, whatever it might be, or Shoshana, preparing Shabbos. It's all beautiful. But who ever taught the infant to actually how to move the parts of the body necessary in order for the sounds to emerge? So it doesn't take much proof to realize, we would use the expression, we're born with it. If we want to use Hasidic terminology, we would say that the way to pronounce the letters are already found in the soul. So we could go in many different directions, and it's late, so we'll sort of end now. One direction, of course, is that we have a soul, a neshama, that's filled with letters. Another direction, which is the way letter number 5 will be emphasizing, is there's the maturity necessary to achieve understanding. And that might be 2 years old. But there's something that precedes it, which is called chachma. That idea, that thought, which is pure spirit. It's higher than understanding. And that is the source of language in terms of pronunciation. The chachma that's found within the neshama. The Rebbe will then, as we study this, it's a long chapter, a long letter. The Rebbe will also then bring forth how this is found in different worlds and in different Hebrew letters. That's the way I started off, the difference between the Yud and the Hey. And all of this is based on a statement of the Zohar, which is referring to a verse in the book of Samuel. David made a great name for himself, for Judea, for his kingdom. The Zohar, David created a name. How can we create God's name? We could create God's name through charity. And then what we will be discussing is, what does it mean to create God's name? And we'll have to be talking about the letters of God's name. To create God's name means to create or to make manifest the letters of Hashem. Which letters? So all of this will be discussed in Yirtzeh Hashem, with God's help, in the following letter. Okay, let me wish you all a very good day. Those of you that have time, we'll see each other at noon, and we'll be discussing the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, sanctification for Hashem's name. Okay, shalom everybody.